Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Nuria. Hi, Vanessa. Welcome to Living in Between Worlds, Conversations for Healing. If this is the first time you're joining us, we're a group of first and second generation immigrants currently in Canada, but our group also includes allies and members from all over the world. We come together bi-weekly to talk about topics that we don't usually talk about, being a first and second generation immigrant, navigating this new world, I guess on the West, in my case anyway. It's very lonely, and there's a lot of struggles that we do go through that we don't talk about. And even just this topic today, we're talking about being a hard worker. It brings up a lot of things that people may not think about. And it's really normalized, especially as an immigrant coming in to just survive and live in this new world. But we would love to discuss this topic today and what it means to us and how it's shaped our current reality, from all the history around being a hard worker, especially as a first and second generation immigrant. So I'd like to welcome you here today. We're joined here with Vanessa, Nuria, Sonia, and myself. And we're just going to open the floor to share our lived experience around this being a hard worker, because it is a different experience entirely as a first and second generation immigrant versus somebody who has been probably here in their home country for a long time, generations and generations. So would anyone like to start off our convo? What is your experience like with this idea of being a hard worker, or how has that impacted you in your lived experience? Were you trained and taught about this as you grew up? How does that impact you today?
I can go first. I think for me, I'm second generation immigrant. My parents are from Hong Kong, so I come from a Chinese background, and being a hard worker is just something I felt like I was born into. Like it was just, that is just who we are as Chinese people. We are here to be hard workers. And I think this is where it's just such a normalized thing for me that I never really questioned it. My grandparents who pretty much raised me for the first portion, the most kind of critical part of our lives, was just kind of like, yeah, do well in school and make sure you put in a lot of efforts. And that was kind of the general messaging, right? And so for me, it was just kind of like, it's just who I am. And so it's interesting because now I'm starting to, I recognize that, okay, there's this sense of hard worker, meaning I got to do work that's hard, or it's got to have a lot of effort. It's got to be, take a lot of time. It's got to take a lot of energy. And then thirdly, it's how I've actually how I receive value in this world. So the harder I work, the more valuable I am in this world. And so it was just so interesting to me to start to recognize that, wait a second, why is this actually my reality? And can I actually change that? Am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to let it be easy? Because I keep getting these messages that, if you're a hard worker, then you're doing well in this world, then you can be successful. But it's like, well, what if I can succeed with it being easy? That to me, it still feels like total fear comes out for me. It's like, no, that's not how it's done, right? But I just love, moving forward, being a hard worker means I am devoted to my work. And that to me feels a lot more loving. The energy behind it is a lot more loving because it's a devotion. You're loving the work that you do. So that it to me, it's so much more natural. There's so much more ease in the energy behind my work that I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. I can work with being a hard worker in this way. But yeah, feeling that it needs to be hard, feeling that I need to put like lots of time and energy into it just doesn't work for me anymore. Like I'm done with burning out. I'm done with like, like classify or identifying with my workload as being like, that makes me important. So I'm like, I'm good to let that go now. Thanks.
There, yeah, we'll go through everyone and then we can debrief after.
You inspire me, Vanessa. I was just taking notes as you were talking, because it's sometimes it's hard to keep in mind all the influence of your family members when growing up, and when you're just building up your character, right? Like you're just following or just making like a copy and paste of the things that you see on your parents, right? So while I was listening to you, I was reflecting on, so what is hard work for me? And is hard work is equal to never being well paid. So you're going to be working hard as an employee. So forget about being a business owner. So that mentality is not for us. It's for someone else, not for us. So if you're a hard worker, you require a specific training, such as being a secretary or working on construction or being a nurse, or like, listen, I'm not diminishing those, but that was the mindset I was growing up. So the impact was, if you want not to work less, but if you really want to have a more joyful work, you have to study to really climb the ladder in the workforce. So the impact of me is that till now, I've been studying unstoppably. So because there was this mindset of, if I get this credential, if I get that credential, then I'm gonna get more money on my paycheck, or but it was just education equals to a better work and a better position, but both are tied through the hard work you put towards. So right now, I'm aware of it, and I like to study new things just for the learning process, and because I'm a really curious person. But I have to be really aware, because I remember one day one of my daughters told me, Mom, the day that you pass away, you're gonna pass away with a book on your chest, right? So because she saw me studying always, right? And as I said, now it's because of pleasure, but in the past was a requirement. And then when I came to Canada, that mindset was reinforced, because you're an immigrant. So these positions not only require a specific credential validated by the country, but also it's for Canadians. So you have to be a hard worker here. That's what we have for you. So it was a space where there wasn't a choice to see, okay, I'm gonna try to be an entrepreneur here, like forget it. So hard work, like, long story short, hard work means you're never gonna get a fair wage, but still you have to do it.
I'll go. I think this is so interesting, because I love how we all have different, we come from different backgrounds, we have different stories. I would say it's funny, because it's almost like in my case, so I came from Venezuela to Canada when I was around 15. And it's almost like the trajectory for my parents was almost to go from kind of entrepreneur mindset to employee mindset here, in the sense that my parents they used to have a factory, like a clothing factory back in Venezuela. And part of the reason why they decided to move to Canada, it's because, the economic, the economic situation, it was very unstable. They were just losing a lot of income, not able to get the materials and the fabrics to make the clothing. And, the country was kind of like in bad shape in the early 2000s. And so I think in their case, so it's almost like I always grew up thinking that entrepreneurship could be a lifestyle for me. So I didn't have that mindset of like, oh, it's not for me. But I did grow up like seeing them work a lot. And I mean, to the point that I also kind of identify with like being raised by like grandmother figures, because they would, be at work all day. And when I was kind of like old enough, I would go to like the factory to help. And I started working with like another aunt that also had her business when I was super young. So I had this kind of like passion in me, but I like working, but that's the thing. It's like, you don't always see how attached you are to something until you kind of like start digging deeper. And that's when you realize, like, you're like, okay, yeah, I like this. And also I'm kind of addicted to it because it gives me so much validation and safety. So yeah, I grew up with the entrepreneurial mindset being a possibility, seeing my parents work really hard, although they never said explicitly that they expected me. You kind of, I mean, as a kid, you also learn by like almost like osmosis, like just like being in their presence and seeing and mirroring and, doing all these things. But it's funny because when they came here, it's almost like, I mean, I tried to put myself in their shoes, and this is something that maybe I could ask them and dig deeper. But I think because they kind of saw their whole business kind of crumble back in Venezuela, they came here when they were like in their 50s, I think. Yeah. They started having this more kind of like conservative like attitude, in the sense like entrepreneurship has a lot of risks, and it's like maybe it's best that you get a government job. And I mean, I totally get it that they kind of came from this mindset of like, we just watched like 30 years of work crumble to the ground. So their message for me was like, hey, you're now in a new country, make sure that you go to university, make sure that you like get a stable job. And then, they start meeting people that it's like, oh, they're working for the government, they have this pension plan. And that kind of became their almost like the new thing to aspire, which is really funny because it's so like kind of antithetical, how do you say, like so much like the opposite of kind of like the entrepreneurial vibe, that it's just like, jump and the parachute will appear kind of thing. They had this attitude a lot of the times in their lives. I mean, they moved from Peru. They moved from like 3 countries before getting to Venezuela. So they were super adventurous. But I think by the time they got here, they really kind of got into this mindset of like, hey, maybe government job, it's nice. So it's funny because I have both messages. I kind of grew up in my late teenage years with that message of like, hey, go work for the government, go work this and here and there. But I also learned the entrepreneurial mess from them too. So I'm kind of like, sorry guys, you already gave it to me. But I mean, am I a bit addicted to work? Probably, yeah. It's still something I observe. It's a constant work in progress. It's a relationship that continues to be renegotiated. So that's my perspective.
Thanks, Sonia. I do agree. I love how all of our experiences are very different. Like it's very a different perspective of this topic. So like I decided to choose this topic for us to talk about today because it's so near and dear to my heart. because I'm a recovering workaholic. So then it's very known, just at least with my business that I am on. So I was raised really young with the idea about work. My mom and dad met here in Canada in the 70s. And my mom really instilled the grades, of course, like I'm a second generation immigrant. So she was always talking about working hard with school, getting the good grades, and really, like 95% isn't enough, Steph, like 100 is better. If I was in school, this is what I'd get. So it was constant shame and guilt growing up, no matter what grades I got. It was really, it came going on like me trying to pursue sciences because that's what my mom wanted me to do. And that would be the only thing that's acceptable. And then eventually, like I grew up with my mom working 3 jobs. I was raised by my grandmother too. My dad only had one job, but only one job. So that was the kind of life I ended up following in her footsteps. I had 3 jobs too, just like my mom. And like with 100-hour work weeks, growing my business and working a full-time job and having a part-time job, I burnt out in a sense, not necessarily physically, but just I lost touch with my emotions and everything. So I was a robot, living my life doing things like that. And I really resonated like hearing about like, the addiction to work could be about validation, feeling safe, because I would freak out on odd days when I'm not productive or not doing enough work or not making money, even though I had more than enough money. Like it was ridiculous how much but a lot of it did go to tax. So that's another story about money. But I was really raised that was the way that I was valued. And even if it wasn't paying me a lot of money, it was time was the most important thing to invest for value. So it's like, you know what, Stephanie, get a full-time job at the hospital, even though you're making like that job would have been $42,000 a year. That is way better than you pursuing all these things like, to be safe. And I like just to feel secure with my benefits or whatever, even though I already had benefits part-time. But it's really just kind of grooming and teaching another generation that hard work is important. Like even as a millennial, they're like, you are the older millennial, that's me. What happened to the hard work mentality? Because younger millennials are so entitled and you are probably the last ones now. Everybody else that's younger than you, they're just lost. They don't work hard anymore. And we kind of really think about where did that come from? Where did that idea come from? Like, how was it ingrained? And in my journey, it's really understanding where this was all put together, because I grew up looking at Filipino people working service level jobs or support or caregiving type jobs, and whatever they got paid, they paid their minimum amount they had to pay for their bills, and they send the rest back home. So all of our grooming was to work hard for others and teach and send money to the Philippines. So my mom would send the money to the Philippines to people who I don't even know, to support them, and then make me pay for my own stuff here. So it's like, you're kind of like, what's this relationship with hardworking for me? Like now that I actually want to talk about it because we're all entrepreneurs here. So it's a really unique perspective, but coming in, it's like thinking, it's like trading time for money is very embraced by my culture, because they want you to, even if you have multiple jobs. A lot of Filipinos have a lot of jobs and they know that Filipinos work really hard, but then they never know that there's any other way of living other than that way. So I'd love for us to dive in now that we have such a very different perspectives of what hard work is, but it is still the same in there. But as an entrepreneur, now that we're kind of going against what the normal thing is, like we're safe, especially immigrants like to come to Canada as skilled workers with a safe career, safe job. We've kind of broken that cycle, us four, with starting our own business. Like, how does hard work and this idea of hard work, of how we've grown up about it, how does that influence you now with your new business and your work and how you're setting yourself up? Nuria.
Wow, Steph, I was really moved with every single thing you say, because also it's like how much hard working is tied to caring, right? So because you, in that way, like, it's okay if all the family is putting, we already talked about expectations in partnership, but like if all the family is hoping or expecting you to do better than us, you have to accomplish that expectation. So work hard, get the credentials, and send the money back, because we, like, that's the price for the expectation. So you have to pay a price for the expectation that others put on you. So it's really frustrating. It's a big burden. And for me as an entrepreneur has been a learning process, because I don't have a reference point. So understanding that prioritize my well-being is part of the investment. I'm the asset of my business. But again, I don't have a reference point. So it's like a little bit going as if you were totally blind, trying to figure it out and following your intuition to know, like, this is a good thing to do. And again, as I mentioned before, is still this shadow around of go and get a full-time job. So it's and also making the distinction when you are working with your clients, right? Because you have this mindset, you're breaking up that mindset, and then you have your client in front of you trying also to figure it out things. And on top of it, there is this social circumstance as a newcomer of how you should be an entrepreneur. So there's like lots of labels. Like today in the morning, I was listening to the news, which is really unusual. And people were talking about the conflict in Ukraine. And so there was one interviewee who was saying, well, please, everybody be more in Canada. We should be more mindful that lots of Ukrainian refugees gonna come and they need a job and they need a house to live. And I was listening to him, and I was like, well, yeah, of course. So this is not a new thing, right? So how we are setting up the structure as a country to provide support to those who are coming in, not only as skilled workers, but also as business owners. So, but what they don't say is this price that is tied to it. Like, you have to be a hard worker, regardless of the field you're going to be working on.
I think, my God, these conversations are so good. I would say, like, being an entrepreneur has been a blessing in the sense that it helped me reveal the workaholism. I had some like hints while I was working full time. I worked like 4 years in a kind of like bigger corporation, and I did have a taste of a bit of burnout back then. I remember I took a week off. I was kind of like, fuck off everyone. I told my manager, like, I'm going to be sleeping for the next week. And that was kind of like the first time I experienced something like that related to work. But I think when you're an entrepreneur, because there's no container that is like set in stone, yes, you can follow business coaches on Instagram, you can follow different blueprints and formulas, but it's like, I mean, once you have explored that for a while, you start noticing that there's no one that's going to give you like a big business in a box. I mean, I tried that many years. It never worked, to kind of like try to take the exact thing that another person does and apply it to my business. It just doesn't work. I mean, it's an art, but a science. It's a bit of science, but it's a lot of art, I would say, in business. It's like you need to be kind of you need to be prepared, but also you need to be kind of lucky. You need to be, there's so many like things that are so hard to predict that it's very, you have to kind of like do it your own way, do it on your own. And I would say working for my businesses, like it has been what helped me reveal those tendencies, because you have no one kind of watching over your shoulder to see how many hours you work. And then it's like, that's when you kind of see yourself working like crazy. And you're like, okay, wait, why am I doing this? What's up with this? So, yeah, I think for me, yeah, working in my business has been a good teacher to kind of teach me where am I kind of doing too much. And also, I would say, like, I mean, going back to like the whole notion of like hard work, I really think I have the feeling, I mean, I have the idea that the idea of like hard work, it's very kind of dependent on the person, right? I mean, something like if you're very good with spreadsheets, and you actually like them, it might not feel as hard as someone who really doesn't like them. And it's kind of like, it's hell, it's going to take me like 6 hours and I'm going to feel so exhausted after that. So I think in the constructing the notion of hard work, there's also this self-awareness and self-knowledge path that needs to take place to see what are the tasks and the things and that make you feel more, that bring you more joy, that bring you more, that feel lighter to do. And I think that's a worth exploration, because I don't see myself completely, kind of divorcing my notion of hard work, or at least being someone, I totally love what Vanessa said, someone who's like devoted to work. I think I still like to take my career and the ways I, choose to make money and to serve people. I like the idea of taking that as an important part of myself, but to kind of like not have it be the center, everything, and to like explore ways to make it, I don't know, to make it work for yourself. And it's a constant work in progress. But one last thing I wanted to say is I really thought it was interesting what you say, Stephanie, on how millennials are kind of, there seems to be almost like a pendulum going to the complete opposite, where it's really funny that like previous generations were really like hard work, and now we're seeing kind of like I think they call it like the anti-ambition movement or something like that, which is basically people being like, I don't care, whatever. And I just think it's fascinating. And I'm just sitting there watching and getting inspired. But yeah, the kind of the older millennial in me, it's like, no, I still do need to get purpose from my work though. So I'm not ready to completely let it go, but to change the relationship and its terms.
Absolutely. How about you, Vanessa?
Yeah, for me, I think my journey has been, it's interesting that this topic kind of came up, because I was just having a conversation about, this socialized part of me, and then there's this like authentic part of me, this creative part of me who's always been, and it's kind of like they're both kind of fighting with each other, because I was socialized to like be a perfect human being that works hard and does well in everything that she does. And that meant like, yeah, overextending yourself, like over pleasing, over committing, over doing everything, right? And so, and really kind of like now I'm in my 4th year as an entrepreneur, you know, in this context of being a life coach. And this is where it was really interesting because I came from a background of being a designer where, you know, I grew in an industry where it was structured. You went into the office, you had these titles, you had these hierarchies that you just kind of like work yourself up to. And that was kind of like the goal. When I was part of that world, it was just kind of like, okay, you start at the bottom and then you work your way up, right? And it's dependent on how much hard work I put into it. And so coming from that and being a designer is a very creative aspect, you know, similar to what Sonia was saying, like as an entrepreneur, it's actually a lot of art. And I didn't actually really see that until actually this year, closer to the end of last year, where, so being in this design industry where it was very much like your expression of what you do is very creative, but you're very much in a structure. And so when I shifted over to having my own business, it was interesting for me to see that how I did try to grasp onto some kind of structure instead of allowing myself to like, I don't have a structure. I can be freely creative now and create my own structure. I didn't even think of that. I was like, you know, similar to what Sonia was saying, I was latching on to like, okay, who has the best system that I can follow? Who has the best formula that I can follow? And then within that context, I can be creative and do my own thing, right? And so I tried that. It doesn't work, right? Like, it really doesn't work because at the end of the day, I feel like as soon as I said yes to being an entrepreneur, it definitely opened. I see it as like a spiritual journey. It's like uncovering all the stuff that I had suppressed or repressed, you know, and I have this opportunity to actually look at it. So I do see it as a real gift to be able to kind of see this. So for me, in terms of the hardworking piece, I adapted to like the 9 to 5 concept. But, you know, even back then, 9 to 5 was not a thing for me. It was more like 8 to 11 p.m. kind of thing, right? So I brought that into my business, forgetting that I'm now the boss, right? Still having that employee mindset of like, oh, okay, I got to work hard. But then I was like, why am I so tired on the weekends, right? And not really having that structure that actually worked for me. So it's been really interesting to kind of navigate to really see, oh, okay, I actually have freedom here. I can actually create my own structure, my own formula. And really, I'm not saying that there's anything bad about those formulas and structures out there. It's there to guide me. It's there to like first give me a template. And now I can kind of pick and choose and be creative in that way of like what actually works for me and go about my own way of doing my work, right? And coming from like, I mean, there's a whole other aspect of how I used to use work as a way to buffer as well, like to not feel like I felt really uncomfortable in the rest of my life. So work was a way for me to feel comfortable, feel safe, right? So now it's kind of like, as an entrepreneur, I'm able to kind of see how, yes, I still kind of use it as a blanket of like a fuzzy blanket where I can cuddle up into because it feels nice and comfortable to be in my work. But I also have this freedom to actually enjoy the rest of my life as well. So what does that look like? How can I have, you know, more ease all around, right? And so it's been definitely interesting to kind of navigate that. And now to this point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go opposite end and try to like, I'm going to double down on making it, you know, go opposite of like the industrialist concept. And I'm going to give myself like full retreat days where I don't work. I'm going to give myself a week off where I don't work, right? Like that, just to blow my mind a bit about it, just to blow my own kind of shit about it, like just to really be able to question, does this whole like socialized culture work for me? What does work for me about this? And if I was to let myself just to like not work and be in my creative juice, in my creative genius part of me, allow that to really shine, what would that look like? And so it's not about like saying F you society, like you don't work, right? And my way is the highway, but it's more just like, okay, I'm going to allow it all to be here. And I just get to play. I just get to kind of pick and choose what actually works for me. And it's never ending. Like it's always going to be an experiment. Like I'm always going to be, I'm never going to finalize what that structure looks like. It's always evolving. It's always growing. It's always like changing, right? So just like us as humans, we're always changing. So I think that's the beauty of it. I think really right now it's just being fully embracing the process of it, of like the creativity of like things coming together, things being let go, like just letting things go and just being in that space of like, okay, I get to define what this means to me. And so I'm going to, I get to define, I get to choose. Even if it's scary, I get to choose. And so, there's so much in this. Like I can bring in money to talk about too, the aspect of like money and being an entrepreneur and feeling that safety as well. Like that has played a big part. Like before I didn't really think about money. And now it's like, oh, it's a little bit more prominent. Like it's really more kind of like in my face now. So lots of different things, but I just love how, the entrepreneurship I do see it as a spiritual journey. It allows me to actually know myself more, really let myself be who I am, who I am authentically am, and without kind of all the labels and all the kind of skins and masks and coats or whatever you want to put on yourself. But so much goodness here.
Sure. Nora, did you want to say something before I jump in? Like I know you wanted to say. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, just from hearing our experiences, so just I guess even from our backgrounds, how different we look at it, it is a very challenging for those who are new or who feel like you're new to Canada or North America, you're first or second generation Canadian. Like the journey to being an entrepreneur is still the same. It's still difficult, no matter what background we are in. Even if we were raised here, multi-generations, like it's still a new process. We all have this journey that we all have to go through. And coming in from a background of this type of thing, like I'm so used to working, I can have multiple jobs as full-time as an employee. And then, but then transferring that into an entrepreneur type thing, you are going to go through, like what I go through is like, is this a hobby that I'm dabbling in? Is this real? Like, cause like no one legitimized my business. I've been in business since 2014 and still not legitimate to my family, right? Other than, oh, you have money now, like you have money to do stuff. But because they don't think I'm working. So it's such a process where you're still thinking about what makes me feel safe, and really battling the in-between worlds. I think that's really a really important fact for us, especially with our experiences, that we were raised with these values from a different time, also a different culture entirely outside of Canada. And then we're trying to navigate that with building a business here and then trying to escape from the safety of that work. Because like from hard work for me as a Filipino, it is part of our identity. When people talk about it, when they hire Filipino people in workplaces, like, you know what, they work hard. I'm going to hire that one because we know that we can just give stuff to them and they generally don't speak up. Like, it's known. I've heard it. I don't want to generalize things, but it's true. Like they're hardworking and then they'll just take on more. And it's removing that part of my identity and then changing it into something else. And that's the beautiful part about it, being an entrepreneur, is like, now we get to redefine an identity, but it is challenging to take that part away because it is so ingrained in our culture. People will still be coming up to me and thinking of me as an entrepreneur. They may not think me seriously because my culture is so ingrained with being a hard worker as an employee. They would never take me seriously as an entrepreneur. So it's kind of like battling this whole other battle in this business. Or like, you know, as us, we're all coaches. We're breaking into an industry that doesn't have people of color who are coming in with these barriers as women. Like I was even looking up, I'm doing my own branding for my business, like influencers in personal development. What are the top ones on Instagram? And I'm like 4 women. I think 4 women and then like 2 Asian males were there, and everyone else was Caucasian. And I'm just like, what's going on? So we have all these battles that we have to go through in this industry as an entrepreneur, but it's really the big challenge is removing the identity that we had in the past to embrace this new identity we need to create for ourselves. And that is really unique for us too, because because of our culture and the way that we've been brought in by our parents who teach us to rely on education. Like, you know, this education will set you free. So then you'll see people obsessed with getting all these certifications, like us taking courses, getting degrees, you know, masters, PhDs, whatever. And we still end up in the same spot. And we're holding on to that as our ticket, but it's really not there. And really creating our own identity in this world, it's such a challenge to really put ourselves out there, to be an entrepreneur and really juggling this work. I've been like lately, I've been really thinking about the business and talking to other women who have accomplished like a business on their own. And then they're like, my life isn't separate from being an entrepreneur. I can't say that I have a separate life because my business is my life, especially as a solopreneur or even as a woman. We even have to think about how we divide our lives with our children or household responsibilities. Men don't have to talk about these things as an impact, or even just like female, you know, gender roles or what we're supposed to be doing. But it's really interesting how we have to embrace all of our work and our personal life together. So it's really different being an entrepreneur. But I want people to know, like, if you're listening to our experience here, especially thinking about going into entrepreneurship as an first and second generation immigrant, that you do have a choice. There is another way. You don't have to go and get 3 jobs and limit yourself with this glass ceiling. There are opportunities for you to be here. It's just finding the people around to surround yourself with that can give you the support, because I know the system doesn't give us support, even if we're here. So I'd like to kind of jump into that part. But if you do need help, you feel free to reach out to any of us to just talk about it, because we can share our experiences with you one-on-one, not paid or anything, just to like even help, because it is lonely to start your own business. But I wanted to kind of, before we finish up, just kind of comment about where did some of these things come up from? Like what systems and structures brought this idea of hard work, addiction to work culture, grinding, or, you know, you have to hustle to get your business going, or even just like the whole glorification of work in North America, especially for immigrants. I'd love to just see what your opinions are. Nuria.
I would say that it comes from slavery. So hard working is tied to suffering, right? So you have to, when we talk about, like, I love when you said, Steph, about, am I having a legitimate business? Or what Vanessa was saying, like, should I have to justify taking time off? Should I justify in front of my family members that my money is clean? Because there's something else on the background, right? Like, if you are having all of this money, it's because it's money laundry, you know, like, it's like money doesn't come easy. You have to suffer to get it. So I think it comes from slavery. And also, I mean, in BC, if you walk through many beautiful trails that we have around BC, almost in all of them, you can see this sign honoring the workers who came from such and such culture to build up this railroad, and they pass away, putting their lives, da da da. And I was like, are you putting all of that just in that stone? What was the compensation for their families? So it's in what, like, it has so many messages underneath, because in one hand is the suffering, on the other hand is like, this is the only kind of hard job available for you, and the way you are serving other human beings is really through serving, right? And there is no room for joy, there is no room for happiness. Like, what are you talking about? Hard work is about suffering, and it's, for me, on my, through my lenses, this is slavery. And capitalism is, it's a fancy way to be like replicating the slavery model. Maybe I sound really like extreme, but I think it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, that's exactly what I thought of first as well. It's just this idea, like, that we get a price tag put on a human being, right? Like, this is where it's like, oh, you're worth this much because you produce this kind of work, that you have this much effort. and that's where it's like, I'm still struggling with that, because coming from an industry where it is billable hours, it's all about your billable hours and how what's your worth per hour, right? And that's just, yeah, a prettier way of kind of packaging up that whole slavery piece. Nuria, what were you gonna say?
I read just like something that I forgot to mention about what Steph said of being an entrepreneur, and being an entrepreneur as a minority, because there is an expectation, like in the expectation of Filipino people, like, are hard workers, Mexican are willing to do illegal things. So those are the labels, like in the it's the mindset, right? So some clients can approach to you expecting that your fees respond to that label. So it's where we have to really like push hard at that glass ceiling that is put on us, because yes, it's not part of my identity. It's a way of being that some people from my culture, for necessity or whatever, were going through. And it's like standing on, that's not the rule, that's not the norm. And more importantly, what I am going to contribute as an entrepreneur is not tied to that. I'm something else, and standing for that, and it takes something. That journey takes something. Thank you.
For sure. Like, I mean, the whole railway thing, like, for me, when I realized about my ancestry in this way, where, you know, even in Canada, right, like, just we were like, Chinese people were brought in to be the hard workers and create the railway. Like, yeah, the families weren't compensated, right? And this is where it's like, oh, and once your work is done, we're going to send you home. You're not even invited back. You have to pay to come back, you know? So it's just kind of like, WTF, like, you know, just being seen as a hard worker. And I love what you said about, you know, I didn't even really recognize that about myself and when people hire me, but like, there is this bamboo ceiling is a very real thing. It's like, I don't realize when people, you know, when they come to me and they hire and they're like looking for my services, and I tell them a price and they're like sticker shocked, and it's just like, well, what did you expect, you know, kind of thing. Like, so yeah, there is that lens that we might not even be aware of. And even in myself, I can say, like, me hiring people as well, right? Like there is definitely a lens that, you know, even growing up as a second generation immigrant, like this is where I couldn't see this before, but now I see. Like I would always go to more Canadians first, right? Like hiring Canadians first, right? And so, yeah, it's just so interesting. Even just like being able to say, okay, yeah, I know my life is priceless. Like even this 1 hour in my life right now is priceless, but my brain doesn't really register as that being okay, right? No, I still have to put a price on it. So, yeah.
I think definitely totally agree that like, you know, the roots of like slavery, capitalism. I would also say like religion. I mean, I don't know which, I mean, like, I don't know, this whole like Catholic saying of like, if you work hard, I mean, I didn't grow up super religious, but this whole idea of like, if you work really hard, you're gonna go to heaven faster or something like that. Or like, what is the other thing? Like the idol, the whole thing with like being idle and equals the devil or something like that. So I think definitely those three systems, like capitalism, like slavery, and religion, are kind of like big driving forces behind this whole notion and emphasis that we have on hard work. But something that came to my mind when we were speaking and kind of like really tracing things back to like the origins. I was at a dinner the day when I visited my parents, like a couple of weeks back. They invited two friends, and this little story really blew my mind. They invited two friends that are from Colombia, and one of them is super into history. He's like, he knows like all like the history of his local town and which family comes from where, and really like tracing back to like colonial days and blah 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 and all these things. And one of the like the women in the couple is like, yeah, I just didn't like that whole, I just didn't like the vibe of the city because it's very kind of like, the mindset is still very colonial. People are kind of like, oh, so what's your last name? And they're kind of like, you know, almost like they're gonna look up your like your family tree just to see like from which family you come, and so on. So I was just listening. I'm like, wow, it's so fascinating that you actually know all these things. So I'm listening, and then the guy mentioned something that I thought was fascinating. He said the people who are like aristocratic by like last name kind of thing, they are taught that even if they lose their fortune, because he said some of them have started losing their fortunes, like some of them, like, you know, they had money, but, you know, at some point, choices, inflation, blame it on whatever, they start losing their money. And he said some of them, the ones that have the last name, they are taught that even if they lose their fortune, they still have the last name and it's who they are. I just thought that was so fascinating because I'm like, okay, so basically they grow up with this very secure sense of self because they are taught that it's who they are, it's their last name, it's their blood that matters. So you can lose your fortune and you're still going to be okay. And he was telling me, yeah, the people who have lost their fortune, like they're still accepted in the circles and they're still part of kind of like the upper society. And I was just like, that is so mind-blowing because it's so like different from kind of meritocracy society where it's kind of like, it's what you gather, it's your fortune, it's your thing. And if you lose that thing, then you lose your value. And I just thought that was so fascinating because I'm like, oh my God, like I've been working to kind of like have this unshakable confidence kind of thing, this like unshakable sense of like worth, and like no matter what happens to me, I'm still valuable and all these things. so yeah, I just thought it was fascinating, and I'm like, okay, the privileged people of the society, they learned that mindset, and then the ones that are not, they learn that like you have to work and produce, and if you can't produce anymore, then like too bad for you, you're not valuable. That really blew my mind. I was like, wow, like difference of mindset. So I just wanted to share that story.
Thanks, Sonia. I think really quick, I guess just from my side, like, I always talk about colonization and where things have happened. I mean, I really encourage wherever you are from in your ancestry, just to investigate what has happened in your history. So I'm glad you brought it up, Sonia, but like in the Philippines, the American, after being colonized from the Spanish for a long time, the Americans took over our school systems and then civilized us. I kind of think about that now, thinking about more residential school children being found in Alberta and thinking about how they were taken in by this religion to civilize them and make them of value to North America. And then that's just the same. We were trained, my ancestors were trained with the school system from that time in order to be the caregivers or the service roles or support type roles, and then to be shipped into America to serve others. And it's really investigating where those mentalities are and thinking about how we now value ourselves based on the hard work. It was ingrained from us from generations in the past. And coming in as immigrants, first and second generation immigrants to Canada, we have to face proving our value. If we're already women, like some of us are gay, some of us have other belief systems, we already need to prove our value when some people are already here in Canada that we're not. They're also settlers, but just maybe from a different time, who are born already with value. So I want that to simmer. And I don't mean to be so dark, but it's true. Like, it's not about having a last name that, like, not only a last name of having value, but then being born of a certain culture, has expectations and entitlements and benefits of it. But then thinking of us coming here to navigate a life, and maybe not in our home country, but a country we decide to be home, like we still have to prove our value in everything that we have to do. So I wanted to leave it off on that note, but we are going to be meeting up, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, to continue this conversation. I think there's a lot of subtopics we could break out from here, but I really want to encourage you, if you are first and second generation immigrant, to listen to this when you're listening to this conversation and really start to think about your life, because just because somebody else defines your value doesn't mean that is. We have a choice of how we can value ourselves. Even if you think there might not be a way, we value you. we value you, and you are a divine being. And you bring joy and value to this world. So really encourage you to think about those things, because sometimes we also have to resist like these things that society has put onto us. But any final words, ladies? I know we can go on for this conversation for a while, but I'd love to hear any final words before we shut down today. I think everyone's settled in. Vanessa?
Yeah, I think really just it comes back down to just trusting in yourself, really. At the end of the day, really allowing yourself that space to listen in to your heart, what's actually true for you. And even if in this moment it doesn't feel safe to speak it out, but just honoring it yourself, really recognizing that, okay, this is my truth, and being curious, like Nuria was saying, just having this like curiosity, and just like, instead of like diving into the books, diving into yourself and really understanding kind of what's going on in here, right? I think is will help to kind of navigate through and create your own definitions, right? Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for this topic. And yeah, we look forward to seeing all of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.